The Center for Investigative Reporting has revealed that two prisons, state prisons in California, have been doing sterilizations of female inmates without consent. Now, this involves 148 tubal ligations between 2006 and 2010, and in layman's terms, it means that they tied these women's tubes without consent. Now, there were two issues that the Center for Investigative Reporting found. First of all, in California, if you are an OBGYN or a doctor in a prison who does sterilizations, you have to get consent not only from the inmate, but you also have to contact officials in Sacramento. In 148 of these cases, they did not get consent from Sacramento, and in many of these cases, they would ask for consent from the women while they were giving birth or while they were on an operating table, heavily sedated. So obviously, it's a little difficult to give consent when you're under those conditions.
Yeah, and I couldn't believe the years. I thought for sure that after I read the headline, that the story was going to tell me, oh, they did it back from 1982 to 1986 or 62 to 68, et cetera. No, 2006 to 2010.
Yeah, I mean, California and many other states in the U.S., I should note, have a terrible history when it comes to forced sterilization, especially when it came to eugenics programs, where the doctors would purposely sterilize men and women that were minorities or that were poor. And the whole reason why that they would do that is because they wanted to prevent them from reproducing and spreading their genes. Now, some might make the argument that, hey, sterilizing these women is probably a good idea because some of them have 5 kids, they're in and out of prison, it's costing the state of California a tremendous amount of money. But when it comes to a permanent procedure like this, you need clear consent. You're messing with people's lives. If you want to make an argument that, hey, why don't you, have them consent to an IUD? Right? Something that is not permanent, but allows you to prevent getting pregnant for up to 5 years. Then we can have a conversation about that. And again, even in that case, I think that you do need consent. But
all right,
this
listen,
yeah,
it drives me crazy, right? That they have 5 kids. I'm going to be real, okay?
Yeah.
And you're in prison, you get impregnated again. What are you doing? What are you doing? And yes, sometimes they go on welfare. And by the way, it's not just prisoners, right? There's the Hasidic communities, I believe, in upstate New York, where they like, well, we don't believe in working and we just believe in getting welfare, and I had 12 kids. Well, that's pretty freaking convenient, right? So I know it drives all of us crazy, right? But they're not animals, they're human beings. So we don't get to tell whether it's, inmates in California or fundamentalist religious people in other states, we don't get to tell them, okay, or not even tell them and just tie up their tubes and say, you don't get to have kids anymore. We have to be decent human beings. And if you want to, like Anna said, you want to do education, you want to say, give them options, great, nothing wrong with that, okay? You do it without consent and you force them into it, it's terrible.
Or coerce them to do it. So I want to read you guys a few examples of women that were imprisoned and they were pressured into getting sterilized. Some of them did refuse, even if they were heavily sedated, which I think is incredible. But others felt so pressured to do it that they actually went through with the sterilization. Cristina Cordero was serving a 2-year sentence, and she said the following: as soon as he found out that I have 5 kids, referring to the OBGYN that was treating her, he suggested that I look into getting it done, referring to the sterilization. The closer I got to my due date, the more he talked about it. He made me feel like a bad mother if I didn't do it.
Look, it's one thing to give somebody a pamphlet and say, look, these are your options. I got no problems with that. Do it, do it, do it, do it. When you're the doctor, come on, man, that's not your job. Now, like when you talk about, and by the way, it costs the state a ton of money. California paid doctors nearly $150,000, $147,460 to perform tubal ligations, right?
Yes.
Now, when you ask Dr. James Heinrich about it, he says, quote, over a 10-year period, that isn't a huge amount of money compared to what you save in welfare paying for these unwanted children as they procreated more. That was the quote for me that ended it. I was like, this guy doesn't give a damn about them. Like, oh, I'll spend the money because they keep breeding and breeding, and I got to stop them from breeding. Look, it's not your job.
That enraged me as well, especially when it comes to justifying a very permanent thing, such as sterilization. But he does make a good point about the fact that unwanted pregnancies and pregnancies for female inmates cost the state way more money than doing the sterilizations. Now, again, I don't agree with the sterilizations. I think the best way to do this is to educate the women, tell them about their birth control options, maybe tell them as much as possible about IUD, so they do that, and that's not a permanent birth control method, but at least you're good, you're safe for at least 5 years and you can get your act together. But here are some numbers that I found interesting. From 2000 to 2010, about 2,400 women gave birth while in prison in California. The cost was $2.7 million. Fewer than 1 in 10 were surgically sterilized. So $2.7 million is significant compared to $147,460.
Right.
So it's a fair point to make, but that still doesn't justify the sterilizations.
They all wanted it done, he claims. If they come a year or two later saying somebody forced me to have this done, that's a lie. That's somebody looking for the state to give them a handout. Now, that handout language, this guy's a bad guy, man. Everything he said is totally coded and it's not very subtle at all. Like, you know how they are. Now all they do is procreate, you know, and compared to what we're going to save in welfare, you know, these surgeries aren't that much at all. Let's force them into that. Oh, here they come again. After I did everybody a favor by cutting off their tubes, now they want a handout. Is that what they want? Mm-hmm. No, they wanted a real choice.
And one final thing, you know, they keep making the justification for doing these sterilizations because in some case the women have had multiple kids, which means that they've had multiple C-sections. And it becomes riskier and riskier if you keep having kids after you've had multiple C-sections. But a lot of the women that talked to the Center for Investigative Reporting said, no, we had like 1 kid and we had 1 C-section, and after that they wanted us to get sterilized to make sure that we wouldn't procreate again. Yeah. So I don't believe that justification at all, and if you have to report to authorities in Sacramento and you refuse to do so, that means that you're trying to hide something.
Is there a chance that doctors like Dr. James Heinrich might have made some assumptions about those women? Well, they're already in prison, et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, I assume they're obviously going to be a burden to the state, and their kids will be a burden to the state for the rest of their lives, and the less kids these kind of undesirables have, the better off we all will be.